Good afternoon, LinkedIn friends, HubSpot Nation. Here for a fun, informative episode. Really, just like probably just indulging like myself. Like, please, Danielle, help me with this long-lasting like question I can answer. We're calling it attribution today, so we're trying to build some attribution with Danielle. I heard you're pretty good at that, but how are you doing today?
I'm good. Attribution is my favorite thing to hate because I never wanted to be good at it, but every marketing ops person, every startup marketer has to show that their time and money is doing something. So here we are. I'm a little more excited because I love what you're doing, so I'll give you that, and that's the only reason I showed up today.
That is 100% fair. And probably leads to the overall conclusion of like, uh, man, when you try to like just do valuable things nowadays, and then you just apply all these attribution like thoughts and strategies and like just the KPIs, it just finds a way to just remove value like constantly. So I'm desperate to try and prove the value as we hear everybody talking about things like GTM being broken, nothing's working as well as it used to. I've had some interesting conversations with Rob Jones. Like literally, we're at the point where it's like, okay, the show is community content because we think that's so important and a big part of the strategy. Like, not necessarily community led the way that some people are trying to execute it, but just being a part of the community and engaging in conversations. Um, so we might just start calling it Let's Build GTM and then just talk about community content the whole time. Just so like
Sure.
little wolf in sheep's clothing there. But I mean, why do you like before we go into because we're going to talk about all the Let's Build episodes and what we've both experienced there, but also try to put it through a lens of attribution. Uh, why why are we in this spot in your opinion where it's like almost everybody loves to hate attribution? I feel like.
Oh, I feel like I have some deeply personal pain associated with this. Being in, startups especially, every single dollar counts for something. And you have to show why it counts for something and why you're making that decision over something else. And every business wants that. It's just some have bigger budgets where, my startup budget was someone else's rounding error. And so when it comes down to it, you have to just show that what you're doing is worth it, and why you should do more of it. But as our industry as a whole, as business is moving more towards personalized connections, as the technology improves and we get, you know, things like AI bots on LinkedIn replying as people, then the things that you can track in the spaces where people are talking and making these decisions are getting so far away from that technology that it's harder and harder to track. And so even before we started this live stream, I said to Chris, I think we're walking the knife's edge of nothing matters and do whatever you want versus like, yeah, let's talk about attribution. Let's figure out how the dollars all fit together.
Yeah. Uh, and it could be, I guess, like in terms of SaaS, that's where I think
Yeah,
like there's a
where are you?
reckoning happening right now where it's like in SaaS, like we are like that is the razor's edge. Like, does SaaS matter? Right. Like basically, I'm happy to say it because I've traced this lineage of problems back to like Salesforce creating a lead object in 1995, and all of a sudden, all this infrastructure. Like, meanwhile, I'm starting to think about all the journeyman, salespeople that I run into in these other industries outside of SaaS that have never touched like tools, right? And like, how are they so successful and why haven't they had to change? Because it's so hard to have a conversation to get CRM adoption when they're the rock star on the team. Like, so why
Right.
do they need to change? Right. But then you come back to like, you need to look at it nothing matters in related to, but because they focus on the stuff that matters, which is relationships,
Right.
right? And you mentioned how important it's been for networking for you.
Yeah.
And like that's that's showing up. That's what showing up looks like. And when you're showing up as an email or as an automated thing, this and that, just so like I might be in the middle of a conversation with you, but now I need you to click this button just so we can track it. Like I
Yeah.
think people are not uh they're not down for that anymore.
Yeah, I feel like you and I are moving into or are pretty firmly in the dark side of that kind of thing. And thinking back to when, Chris Walker started talking about dark social and dark not dark web, that's a different thing. But dark social channels and how you like can't measure it, but you need to show up for it. That's things like community and Slack communities and we're back to in-person events pretty frequently. I know locally, I'm so excited to show up for some events. I was at a breakfast last week. I've got a wine tasting next week. Like, I'm so excited to go to those things and talk to people because I get to talk to people. And I'm not coming home as me, the consultant running a business, and putting all of those connections in LinkedIn, putting them all in my HubSpot so that I can track when I connected to them where maybe I should at some level, but at least I'm connecting with them on LinkedIn with the interest of like, let's learn from each other. Let's stay in touch because there's so much that we can gain from each other. And when that is your ethos going into it, rather than like, we need to track how many connections we need before we can make a sale, like it becomes such a different thing that you're showing up with. Like I just want to meet people. I also want to go taste wine because it's one of my favorite wine stores. So I'm just going to show up for that and see what happens. And I have no real interest in selling myself or my services or finding partnerships. It's really just figuring out like, who's out there? What are you doing? Why did you show up tonight? Who do you want to talk to? How can I help you? And then I'm loving that we have spaces where that translates online now because we've got, different platforms. I haven't seen this come up as much, but there are like online platforms where you can like log in and it's sort of a walled garden Reddit where like you can just talk to other people who are allowed into that space. And I know those exist and I've been a part of a couple of them, but I'm never showing up there. It's mostly in, Slack and messaging platforms where we can all have that instant feedback and there's the give and take. Um, yeah, I'll stop rambling there.
I think that's exactly right. And guess we'll at least attempt to do some attribution here because we can, you know, there's just some greater objectives at play. And it's interesting to think about how like this like most people know uh and for the same reason I can't answer that question always very easily of well, what's the ROI? Like, what did you see? When everything, almost everything, like is relationship based, right? Like in the value that it provided. Um, and that could be like relationship with the market as a whole and how like the personal brand grows. Cause I definitely like, when you start showing up on expert lists and you've only been doing content in the ecosystem for like less than a year, right? And there's the same list that other people, I apologize to George P. Thomas all the time. Like he's been doing it for like 12 years and I'm on the same list as he is. And I was like, sorry, but it also speaks to the power of something like LinkedIn when you show up in a
Yeah.
valuable way like that. And like there was zero chance that I get to do this if I'm inside of a business or on an internal team. Um, because it was like so much of it's just qualitative. And you brought up Chris Walker, and he just did a recent episode um, with Dave Gerhardt, and he, like one of his first go tos, or he's explaining the value of doing content in this way, which is basically like episodic content, regular engagement with the community, like the voice of customer.
Mhm.
It's just there's no way to be to get it better than that, right? Like
Yeah.
you feel it, and that's where like your network grows. And we just launched Profoundly today. Like that, like Profoundly is the those two things coming together, like a just a severe passion to solve a problem that we just know exists because we exist in the community,
Yeah.
and then solving it with the network that has been built of everybody just talking about this. Like, I think it's going to be very powerful. And like, how do you, like, maybe I can give you a number on what that looks like in a few years, but like, I can tell you it's much harder to
Mhm.
create this platform without having done this and created this network and created this trust, like, within the community, right?
Yeah. There's a funny parallel here to influencers because I would never consider myself an influencer. Even I'm with you on the like expert lists. Like my name's shown up on things. I'm like, dude, I'm still just sitting here in my pajamas at my home desk. Like I'm still doing the same thing I was a decade ago. I guess I have a little bit more wisdom under my belt, but like, thanks. That's cool. But it's really just that you're showing up. It's that you're in everybody's feed. It's that you are talking to people and building these connections and having that. And the parallel to influencers is everyone talks about, building your audience. And there's sort of that knife's edge analogy again, where like you are strategically building your audience in a specific way and you have your chosen platform and you try to migrate that to another platform. I feel like we have not had that focus. LinkedIn is our chosen platform because it's easy and everybody's already there, but we're not trying to build any specific audience because let us tell you about the back end of LinkedIn's live stream tools. It is not for building an audience or tracking anything.
No
But when it
bueno.
comes down to it, like we have this connection where I felt like I knew 50% of the people at Inbound and, I got to see you in person for real life. Um, and then you've got Slack communities where that translates over, and then you've got other places where that shows up. Some of those Slack communities have live meetings once a month where you start to see some familiar faces, and it's like that network exists completely separate from a platform, and that I think is one of the coolest things that you've built over the last year.
Thank you. Uh, couldn't agree more. Feels pretty special the way it's come together. And that's where, like, the one thing I'm excited to see is now that, like, we're doing it as a platform, like, that's been the challenge. I'm the one experiencing the majority of the results because I can see notifications from every angle. I can see every message about the shows that we do, get the connection requests. And that's where, like, thinking about the goal, like, literally, it became like, how do we do this? Right? Like, just more people sharing knowledge because I'm sick and tired of running into knowledge issues in during the sales process. Right. So that's where it's like, yeah, I have a goal where I would love to sell more HubSpot or to help people do better things in HubSpot, but they can't do that unless they know what the hell HubSpot does
Yeah.
and what is in it, right? I've taken up recently just weekly, posting a list or commenting on the list of 18 native objects that exist in HubSpot, just as like a friendly PSA until I run into somebody, until I go a whole week without running into somebody that thinks it's just contacts, companies, and deals,
Yeah.
right? And uh, I took the lead from Kyle here, right? Like, he's the guy that shows up every day, but literally you just do the math, and it was 800 updates, in 2023. I think well over 1,000 last year. He's one guy showing up every day. Math doesn't work to keep up, and I was like, okay, instead of complaining about it, because I was definitely like highlighting it for anybody who would listen prior to March 18th. I was like, all right, let me see what I could do. Like, I can't get myself to make on demand content. Like, it doesn't even make sense because the platform is moving so fast. So, like,
Hmm.
anytime I put into a tutorial, are they just going to change the menu tomorrow? And then I got to redo it. Right. So
Yeah.
that worsens the problem of the knowledge gap. So let's just press play. Um, Turned into over 350 episodes last year,
Wild.
which is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Um, And first, like, gotta give a thank you to Kyle and Deanna. And as we talk about these things, like so many, it's like there's no other ecosystem that this could be possible, like what we're talking about. Um, because it is about the network, it is about the community, it is about value first. And it started where like, hey, I'm like a nobody partner, like 5 months into the game. I'm talking about something that people care about and is a little nuanced and nobody else is talking about it. So yeah, let's appreciative of the opportunity to get on the admin hug. And that's where it was like, this is where even the admin hug has a special like delivery where they embrace the messy, right?
Mm,
It's like the opposite of almost all the other content in the
yeah.
ecosystem, right? And that getting past that like need for production value, that was one of the first hurdles I had to cross was like, can we get other people okay with not prepping like at all? Because there's no way to achieve this cadence.
Yep.
But now I'm here talking about the strategy of doing this instead of getting to the attribution. uh, so got a bunch of people involved, a bunch of episodes done. Uh, Somebody asks, "What's the ROI?" Um, and so now I'm here talking to you as the consultant. Like, how do I show the ROI on this? Danielle?
My very consultanty answer is it depends. What's your ultimate goal? Because at the end of the day, like how you frame the data that you have and how you present that back to people just is a story. Like it's obviously we're not making anything up. It's not a fantasy story. But it needs to craft the storyline of what you're trying to work towards. And so it is interesting to hear about the strategy and how this came to be because it was like, what is the goal? Why are we doing this? And the goal was like, I don't know, we'll see where it goes. Like, let's just show up and see what happens. And like, great, mission accomplished by like the end of week one. Um, and I think we've all kind of felt that where, I've loved being able to produce content. It definitely broke down the wall of like, oh, I need to be polished and have a script or have some talking points ready. Like you basically taught me that's not real. We don't need to do that. And so when it comes back to, what does this mean for us? What did we all get by showing up from this? The consultanty question is like, well, why were you trying to? So if you have an answer for it, I'd love to hear it. I feel like I've already answered it for you, but feel free
Well,
to
it was
elaborate.
definitely like the lack of knowledge in the ecosystem was definitely real.
Yeah.
Like, right. And not seeing all I would see is you've got Kyle's posts, you've got the admin hug, which is really
Mhm.
displaying. And I told even HubSpot, I was like, just do that times 10. Like,
Yeah.
and then try to help like 100 people outside of HubSpot do it
Yeah.
because we shouldn't expect that of HubSpot to go into all the nuances of all the different industries, of all the different tools,
Mhm.
right? They can't do that. And we shouldn't expect them to because we're the ones with the expertise.
Mhm.
Uh, and so that really solving for that because I ran into like a point where if I've built the brand enough as the post sales guy or the order guy or the portal guy, and I'm getting referrals from people like Kyle and Max Cohen, it's like, okay, the marketing's working.
Yeah.
Like, who else would I rather get referrals from? Um, and then I run into people that have bought the whole thing, but we can't get past like their knowledge of the system and their
Mhm.
understanding to the point now where it's very easy. The first bridge I try to cross, again, so much of this has learned through doing the content and seeing how people like think about HubSpot.
Mhm.
I know that most of the time I've got to cross a bridge to from HubSpot is just a marketing and sales tool to it's not just a marketing and sales tool. And if I can cross that bridge, now everything starts to make sense,
Right.
right? But until then, it's like, oh, why would we put that contact? Why would we connect that thing? Why do we need revenue data from our accounting system in there? Right? It's just
Yeah.
sales,
Yeah.
right? And that definitely came through like doing all these and understanding how to like talk about this stuff in a way that got like the resonance.
Mhm.
So like again that always wanting to try and solve for these just mountainous problems of like 50%, failure rate of CRM and whole industry is not using it. Like, and then as soon as I only need it to happen to me once or twice where it should be an easy win, and then we just lose because the IT team like gets in the way because they think HubSpot is some lead generation system.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, I'm not gonna put myself through that. Um, so that was definitely a primary goal. Um, and also like this is combined with like been somebody who was just really like appreciate the value of LinkedIn, would sing its praises like to anybody listening, give direction, do 30 for 30, show up every day. I
Mhm.
wasn't doing that. Like I had never done it. And I was like, okay, how do I like maybe this like I just need to show up because before that I'd like go listen to a podcast on a walk, um, and then come back with some idea and like I would just like, all right, I'm gonna knock this post out in 15 minutes. Be an hour later, it's like some 3,000 word post or 3,000
Yep.
character post. It's
Same.
like, all right, that's not sustainable. Um, Let me just start like let's see if I can go live and just start talking about stuff. Meant to be a 15-minute show. I think I hit that mark one time on the first show. Um, but also it's like you start to see it against the rest of the backdrop of content. It's like, okay, if nobody else is doing this and we are talking about things that are hard to talk about, it's never one, two, three done, with a lot of
Yep.
our topics. Like we've got to find a way to talk about this as a community. So those were the original goals. And of course I do like we did 78 of these shows first and I feed it into Claude and I'm like, what was my tone? Like what would you say the goals were? And it was like, yes, that's exactly what I was going for. Okay.
Yeah.
Now how do we do more of that? Because I'm one guy, right? That's where we took it, next. So that's the goal. And that's how simple it should be, right? Like
Yeah.
if that's the goal, I I guess so instead of just taking it for granted. So I tell you that's the goal.
Yeah.
What can we look at to show that it worked?
Yeah, so the 2 sort of data points that I would try to pull out, which we know can be quite difficult given our limitations with technology and the way that this came to be, like, we weren't tracking everything. We weren't setting things up in a way to track it. So I would wanna look at the variety of content and the number of people reached. And we have some of that data, kind of. I was just trying to pull data from my LinkedIn profile on like, okay, all videos I've posted, how many impressions of those posts got. You can't actually get that number unless you pay for something else or have a third party tool. So I won't go too far down the LinkedIn complaining rabbit hole because I can really get stuck in there. But we do have some of your data from YouTube. Did you want to flash that up on the screen or just talk about it?
Yeah, we'll flash it up because it's definitely like we'll be able to talk about some usual KPI expectations. Um, but something that came to mind, like that's where it's like most people, even the co-hosts, the people who sign up, like it's very hard coming back to this idea where I've been the platform and it's very hard for everybody else to understand like the true like breadth and depth and like scale of what we accomplished last year. Um, because I pretty strategic about like whenever I ask somebody, it's either like, "Oh, you did a great post about this. Like, do you want to, talk about that thing? Because you sound like you're an expert in that thing." Right. Or it's somebody raised their hand. I'm like, okay, fill in the blank. Let's build blank with Danielle Irwin. And that
Mhm.
blank, hopefully it has to do with HubSpot, but for sure it has to be something you're passionate about. Right. And the targeting in that way, like against the backdrop of, okay, what are the problems that everybody has every day? It's
Mhm.
unifying the data. It's CPQ. I told Bill, I was working on Bill for months. I was like, dude, whenever you want it. Like CPQ guy is gonna be so easy. Even now, like we do anything, and I think just because the word CPQ is in there, like it just automatically gets like impressions more than anybody else. And that's where it's like, okay, what kind of game are we playing? Like, are we playing like keywords for the algorithm?
Yeah.
Because if we are, it gets a lot less valuable,
Mhm.
right? And so much of this, like as an example, so after about 3 months, you know, and this is where like against the goals, like the execution, right? If my goal is knowledge sharing, like as widely as possible and facilitating it from one person, right? Like going live on the platform where it will still be will be recorded, so it's automatically on demand and being distributed
Mhm.
by an algorithm, right? That is like, okay, let's but sacrifices I'm making, it's very difficult to find old shows, right? The discoverability is not there.
Yeah.
All the organic inboundy stuff that we talk about, right? It's I'm sacrificing that just to like get the content created. So I built, I started doing YouTube as more of like a repository. Let's make it easy for even me to find old links and share them with people. Cause I think that's also a miss on most content plans. It's like having always having a piece of content to answer the question that comes up in the chat. Like, man, that is a trust builder, right? Like,
Yeah.
and if you can do that in the moment, every moment, that's like you get on people's sides really quickly. So so we're here, we're looking at the YouTube data. Uh,
Yeah.
What kind of,
Which I think it's worth noting, I'm in the YouTube account right now on the back end. We didn't start posting videos to LinkedIn. We got the first views on July 8th. So this is like 4 or 5 months after you started recording. And so this is definitely not the complete library and certainly not a complete picture of views because we're pushing into LinkedIn and you can't get numbers out of LinkedIn easily. But I think it's still, to your point, like this makes that discoverability and shareability a bit more accessible. And so it is still really interesting to see where this channel that exists and is mostly neglected still gets a lot of traffic and attention for something we're not trying to do.
yeah, yeah. And that's where, like, once you share this, like, strategy in a vacuum, right? And it's like, oh, here's a YouTube video that's an example. And somebody like there's 7 views, right? And it's like, yeah, because I'm not like that's the most common pitch I get on LinkedIn is like, man, I can help you optimize YouTube. It's like the first question is, do I want to optimize YouTube?
Yeah.
Right? Like maybe ask that first, which is my answer because I want like always just trying to educate against these mountains. And it's like, oh, that would be great. I'm just not trying to optimize YouTube right now. So I just don't need your services.
Yeah.
Right. Um, and so that's where it's like, yeah, clarity on the goal like matters. Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Um, so so for me, like if it comes back to that networking thing, like what we're always gonna come back to trying to make sense, I think, out of what's happening on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
Which takes us to like some other metrics that aren't the best, right? Um,
Yeah.
in terms of the usual stuff. But if you've done this, especially lives, this is where it's like, again, like the sacrifice I'm making is basically saying I can't count on any data, like because I'm doing LinkedIn lives in a way that it wasn't meant to do. Like not even, I'm scheduling them like the day before or as it happens because it's every day. And since you're forcing me to make a post every time I make an event,
Mhm.
I know that you're gonna get mad at me if I just do 5 in a row, right? And try to schedule out. So making that sacrifice to say like, okay, I'm going to have it after. It's going to be distributed. Um, And then the content collaboration aspects, like,
Mhm.
most people don't say no, like, to doing a show, right? I'll
Yeah.
say live isn't always for everybody, but that was a fun part of it. It's like, those are the little things, the qualitative things, like, when I especially when it happened to George, just floored me, right? It was with a hug, but it was the same concept, like, where it's like, when you understand that there's just passion about the topic and you are truly an expert about it, like, you talk about it every day
Mhm.
otherwise. Like, in some cases, you just made a post about it and you put a bunch of work in for that. So why do we need to put in more work to figure this out? And having people go through it one time and be like, "Oh, okay. I guess I don't have to treat this like a webinar and like 4 weeks of campaign and
Yeah.
like all this stuff." Now I'm the one rambling. Uh, what else are we digging into? Like, if we can, because I think we do need to help people understand, like, measurement of relationships, like the
Yeah.
quality, the depth, like, and this
Yeah.
should tie to like retention, expansion, all the goals that we know teams have. Like, how are we helping them connect the dots here?
Yeah. I have some interesting qualitative, stories that have, like, come out of this, and that is basically that every time I've reconnected with someone in my network, because I love doing that, and I will talk to people completely out of the blue and just be like, "Hey, let's catch up." Uh, every single time I had one of those calls, they're like, "Hey, I've really loved watching what you're doing on LinkedIn." And, like, I have no idea if one of 7 that watched my video is that person that I'm talking to, but I frankly don't care. It was memorable enough for them to say like, "Hey, I see you showing up." I don't even care if they've watched 1 or 20 videos. They see that I'm showing up and I care about it, and for the, like, downstream, attribution impact of that, they're going to see me at the top of their feed more frequently, and it's an easy way for me to create content. So, like, the blatant marketer in me is like, "Well, they're seeing it. Great. That means something." And that's where it always comes back to attribution is like the surround bound approach, the all bound approach. Like you want to show up everywhere and make people remember you. But when you produce content for the sake of producing content, or you're trying to build a strategy around content that's really measured and intentional, there's absolutely value in that. But when you also just show up and like be your weird self, like there's a lot of value in that too. And so if that's what you can put forward, then like absolutely just go run with it and you see where it lands. And then you start to get all these stories that are like, I love what you're doing. Oh, I saw this. I have a question about it. Or I can reply to someone. I think I did this on LinkedIn. There was someone who was asking about like webhooks and APIs through HubSpot. And I was like, oh, yeah, this sounds like fun. Here's a video of me doing this in like a live stream. And then, of course, it turned into a really embarrassing wall of love from all my internet friends. But it was really cool that I was like, yeah, no, I've done this. Watch me do this for real. And sort of having that library of content to fire back with. It was like a low key pitch. Um,
Right.
and
Because
it's
it's
so
value,
valuable. Right. And
right?
it's me as one person having that. When you pull it all together, um, and it's tied back to Chris Caroline's LinkedIn profile, then all of us together have sort of built this very ambiguous, not at all defined community that we get to build on top of and work together in and, share things. And it's been really fun.
Yeah. Well, I'm super grateful that you feel that way because you've definitely been huge, in terms of bringing the value. Um, and like, I felt the same from like going to inbound. And that's where it's like, it would be nice if we could just have logical conversations. Like, if you're trying to capture data around a journey and you know that half the journey is invisible,
Mhm.
like, how good is the other half? Like, because when we get to inbound and people say those things like, "Oh, I see you on LinkedIn every day." Like,
Mhm.
and I've never met them before, and they
Yeah.
come up like they know me. Like, that's like Rand Fishkin posted a couple days ago, like, advertising works better. when they know, like, and trust you,
Mhm.
right? And it's like we're at a point where the 2 pillars you have are everybody's overwhelmed with activity and content. There's too
Mhm.
much of it. How could I possibly, like, want more of it? Yet there's still this huge chasm of knowledge that everybody has, so they gotta get it in some way.
Yeah.
Um, and they're not paying attention to you until they know you, until there's some kind of, like, less uncertainty, and that's where it's pretty clear that most of the people that say that when they see, like, "Oh, I see your big beard on LinkedIn every day." It's like they probably didn't watch any show, like,
Yeah.
at all,
They
right?
saw still on the video cover.
Right. But just that, like, mere exposure effect, like, literally opens the door so that when there is a targeted message at this point, like, I think the targeting, like, idea of top of funnel, is just, like, I think it's going away, and especially with AI coming, like, all these tricks that we would use to get attention and things like that, like, it's just uh, not a viable strategy, in my opinion. And um, you mentioned about, like, showing on video, like, your
Mhm.
expertise, like, having that, like, that's like the last bastion of being able to prove, like, yep, this is me. I do the thing. Like, that challenge right now in the HubSpot ecosystem is real. Like, how do I
Mhm.
know? Like you said, you get the certification. You've done it with other clients, but, like, how do I know, like, that
Mhm.
you've actually done that? And the show and tell aspect is going to be just more and more important as we go forward.
Yeah, I think our theme and our word for the year is authenticity. We kind of did it last year, but it just continues to be true. And now our audience is watching us free fall into the nothing matters side of that knife's edge.
Oh, I don't know about nothing matters. It's sad that we have to look at it like that. That's why, like, when Rob said he wanted to talk about GTM being broken,
Mhm.
uh, and I think he asked, like, why. I, like, just snapped back, like, "SaaS, like, it's SaaS's fault." Like,
Yeah,
um,
we did
and I
that.
haven't found anything to, like, refute that yet. So it's like, uh, we'll see shortly. I mean, with the rise of agents and, like, people have real concerns about, like, the value of that of all these different domains that we've accepted as standard for, like, 20 years, right? It's kind of the eyes are getting clear, I think. So we're gonna keep doing stuff like this because
Yeah,
we feel the value, at least, and we interact with all of the lurkers out there who might not engage on a post directly. But when they
yeah,
show up every day in your inbox, it's becomes pretty clear that what we're doing is working. And at some point, you just have to stand your ground and say, like, oh, all these other metrics, like, why do they matter? And then these ones, don't. Um, so hopefully this was helpful, shed some light. If you want, like, advice or, like, coaching or, like, on the kinds of questions, like, we know that everybody is dealing with
mhm,
these issues right now. And, like, if you feel strongly about just being active on LinkedIn, being in the moment with everybody, like, feel good. That's the right, like, feeling. Like, there's a reason you feel
yeah,
that way. That's how we create value right now for each other, and we need it now more than ever. So we're happy to help you ask the right questions, and hopefully get to the right solutions for you. Thanks so much, Danielle.
yeah, thanks for having me on.
My pleasure as always. And until next time, I hope everybody has an awesome Thursday. Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you.